And a child's brain in poverty is not broken in any way. It's functioning just as it was designed to. It's if it's in stress, it's going to be more reactive and less well regulated.
So we're thrilled that Dr. Clancy Blair is joining us today to talk about his important work in self-regulation. Thank you so much for joining us and for, being a mentor for me over the years. I really appreciate it. So something I think that, as parents, a lot of us think about, and obviously a lot of researchers and psychologists think about is, what self-regulation is and how it looks different at different stages. I think, especially in earlier childhood, like what is fair to expect from our, younger child versus toddler versus preschooler, and not to have unfair expectations, maybe.
That's a good question. I developed a model of a dimensional model of self-regulation that has dimensions at lower and higher levels. So the lower levels are physiological and emotional and even genetic. And the higher level order aspects of the model are attentional, volitional focusing of attention and the executive functions. And, in the model, the lower level aspects of the model are up and running, in infancy. The higher level aspects of the model come into focus like around age 3 to age 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that sort of look like in terms of, if I have my 2-year-old and, quote unquote, the terrible twos, like, what is it fair to expect of them and what is it not?
It's fair to expect that, self-regulation will develop gradually. Toddlers will have temper tantrums, but they can be expected to, control their emotions. You should talk to your toddler about emotion regulation strategies. Like, you're feeling angry right now. What does that feel like? How can you control that feeling?
I love that idea of talking to them and making them realize that you understand that this is hard, but maybe we need to figure out a different sort of behavioral strategy.
Yeah.
Because at least I found with my older one, it was like sometimes I would lose maybe my cool in those situations, and you're out and you're trying to like get on an airplane or with your 2-year-old, and
exactly.
That in some ways that you're expecting a little bit too much from them, but the situation almost just demands it. So I felt like with that one I wasn't as good, but with the younger one I better like be like, I know you're frustrated, I know you're angry, and it might just be the child, but she seems to sort of calm down faster when I just label it for her, at least.
Yeah.
Rather than just be like, stop it. Which I'm sure, all of us parents do at times.
And the physiological part, is up and running. It's related to the cortisol response and the catecholamine response, norepinephrine and adrenaline. Norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are noradrenaline and adrenaline. There are genetic differences among us in genes that code for the reaction to stress hormones. So some people are more sensitive to stress and other people are less sensitive to stress. But that's, that's small variation. That variation is small. And it's, it's nature and nurture.
I'm just curious, when you say small variation, like, is it statistically significant variation, or is it, but at a small level?
It's very small, like 4%, 3%.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear. Because I guess, a part of you kind of figures it's, more biologically based, maybe. Mm-hmm. So, I know like in your work, you've looked at so many different things around self-regulation, but I think something that is really sort of interesting, especially for parents and teachers, is this idea of sort of environmental stress, mm-hmm. and how that impacts self-regulation in early childhood, and how we can support children who maybe have more environmental stressors.
Environmental stress and self-regulation is moderate in size, but potentially profound, because environmental stress can flip a child's response to a more reactive response and actually, shut down the executive functions. That's theory, but it's well-based theory,
So does that explain some of the associations that, people find between like trauma and
Yes.
self-regulation?
Trauma, even poverty-related environmental stress, and not all poverty families are experiencing, environmental stress, but some are, and they're more likely to.
I think that's what's so, in a way, challenging, right? With all this research, is like figuring out why these associations exist. Like you were saying, not all families in poverty are experiencing this stress, but then poverty in general is associated with stress. Right. So it's like.
And a child's brain in poverty is not broken in any way. It's functioning just as it was designed to. If it's in stress, it's going to be more reactive and less well-regulated, more reactive and less reflective. There's a good biological basis for that. And, environmental stress is very real for some families, for some children.
I think that's so important to, how you were saying, like the brain's not broken is, sometimes I feel like policy and other things that have good intention in trying to provide supports for these families, but they phrase it in a way that makes it feel like broken. And sort of fighting against that. Like this is, we want to help these children provide supportive environments, but that doesn't mean that there's anything broken,
Yeah, exactly.
It's like walking that fine line, I think, with research and practice is, making your point, but not having it taken the wrong way. Can you mention, for those of us who aren't maybe, necessarily in like psychology or education, sort of why the cortisol response is, well, the pros and the cons kind of to the cortisol response?
If a cortisol response is well regulated, that's going to be, awesome for the child. It's when cortisol is chronically high or chronically low that children have trouble regulating, because cortisol is a neuromodulator and it affects activity in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive functions. When it's well regulated, which is a normal stress, stress response and stress regulation, it's very good for the child's executive function. And when it's chronically high or low, it's not very good for the child's executive function, because the prefrontal cortex will shut down synaptic function and turn on the motoric and emotional response to stimulation. So
I'm sort of familiar with what causes maybe higher levels of cortisol, but I'm not as familiar, and I think a lot of people aren't, with a low level. Like what would cause a low level of cortisol?
It's unknown currently, but I think it's, the system gets stressed out, and it,
it's almost like the motor gets burned out, kind of.
It hits, right? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's a lot more out there about the high, and not the low. So it's just interesting to think about. As parents, because most of those listening are parents, and you're a parent. What
my children are grown.
Which has pros and cons to it, right?
Yeah.
As a parent of a teenager, I'm like, well, you survived the teenage years, so that's something that's one of my goals right now. But, I think you've been in this work the whole time that you've obviously been a parent. Like, what are sort of takeaways that you would say that you've, gleaned from your work for parents?
That's a question I get all the time. A parenting style that's safe and secure, for one. A parenting style that gives children constrained choices. By this, I mean, choice between playing outside or playing with blocks. Choices that are open-ended are, stressful for children. And don't stress out about it. Parents are going to lose their cool sometime. I've lost my cool, you've lost your cool, just roll with it.
And so I think about, somebody told me one time, it's about the repair often, not the actual argument, right? And how you modulate your stress, their stress, and kind of repair the relationship in the moment. I think it's interesting that you said that about open-ended, because I feel like, some of the parenting literature out there is more like, talks about the open-ended, options for children, and allowing it to be, the idea of child-driven gets taken, I think, a little out of context. And instead of, child-driven play, which is like a good thing, right? It becomes like everything is child-driven, and the what is it? The cart is leading the horse. So I think it's, can you just say a little bit more about that, and why it's important to provide children with maybe an option, but within a constrained sort of system?
Yeah, it's important for several reasons. Like, it's important for, self-regulation, and it's important for, just good parenting. I try to give my children constrained choices when they were young. I don't remember which choices they made were presented to me. But yes, it's maybe good parenting. I think so. Yeah.
Well, I've noticed it in my own parenting, and even like when I was in the classroom, you gave kids too many, 4 or 5 choices to even a kindergartner, and they're overwhelmed, and they're trying to focus on remembering the first choice. You're on the 5th choice, and they don't even know what they want to do. And I think it does lead to a lot of stress. So I think it's good to hear that, because sometimes I think it gets confusing because you hear all these different things out there, right? As a parent, and on social media and whatnot. So thank you. So, this is just kind of wrapping up, but thinking about this work that you've done in self-regulation, and thinking about, especially I'm thinking more about a classroom context right now, as a teacher, when you have 20, 25 young children sometimes with you. Is there, when we think about these supportive environments to provide children, especially who are stressed at home, is there like a school environment that you think, really supports children that are maybe in a chaotic home environment?
Yes. There's good research on a classroom that's well organized, gives children choices, constrained choices. Like, do you want to play with, do you want to do the science area or the reading area? And you can work on emotion as a way to increase executive function.
That ties in nicely. So we were talking to Megan McCormick, who you know as well, a couple weeks ago, about looking, as a parent, when you're looking at a pre-K and trying to find one that might be most supportive for your child, because she's done all that work on the pre-K with Pamela and whatnot. And she was sort of saying the same thing, even if for children who might not be in stressful home environments.
Exactly.
Centers, but choice within the centers, and how the recent research is showing how working within play, you can teach emotional skills, academic skills, and they support self-regulation in the long run.
Exactly.
So it's nice the two of you had the same conclusion. So Clancy, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know our listeners appreciate it, and thinking about, I think this is a really kind of one of those tricky points of parenting and teaching, right? Is the supporting kids with these skills, because as we all know, when self-regulation is not maybe completely online, it can be tricky for all involved. So in case folks want to read more, which I'm sure they will, about your work and you, where are the best places for them to find more information about this work?
My Google Scholar page.
Great. So Google Scholar. Well, we will send them there.
Okay. And
great. Well, thanks.
Yes.
Go ahead.
You could search me in PubMed.
Oh, great. And I've also found just Google sometimes, right? In case Google Scholar is something that folks aren't as familiar with. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Clancy.
Thank you.
It was good